BrightRock believes that with every change in life comes opportunity, and the budget speech isn't any different. The minister's speech means change for us all, because whether the numbers are big or small, change always counts. This budget speech 2023 special edition of the BizNews Power Hour was illuminated by BrightRock, the first ever needs-matched life insurance that changes as your life changes.
This is the ANC at its worst. Greedy, growling, arrogant, totally out of touch. And they actually don't care because they're stealing so much money. And one wonders what the overseas investors are going to think about this. This is now being exposed. Bloomberg, Financial Times. And that's one of the reasons why, and I'm mentioning this at the Berg conference, that in the last 6 years, R1 trillion has been withdrawn from the JSE via the stock market and the bond market. It is a humongous amount of money that is flowing out of the country. That's how the foreign investors are looking at South Africa, and they are running for the hills.
Well, next week in the Drakensberg, Magnus Heystek will have a legion of fans following him. The reason why he's got a legion of fans is the founder of Brenthurst has been a man to always tell us as he sees it, not as other people might want him to say it. And that's because he has what a former boss of mine once told me was the most important thing in independence, FU money. So when you've built up a business of your own, you kind of don't have to listen to what people tell you to do. You can tell the truth. And my goodness, has the BizNews tribe loved his stories. So there we go, Magnus. FU money. I haven't thought about that since Dani Cronje. I worked for him for a couple of years at ABSA. One of my mentors and one of the most wonderful human beings, Dr. Dani Cronje.
I spent many pleasant hours on the golf course with him. A very, very tough competitor on the golf course, and that goes back many years. I do still speak to him from time to time. We just bounce ideas of markets, and he's well retired, I think, in Jeffreys Bay or that area. So, yeah, I do have contact with Dr. Cronje.
He's a superb human being, and I can remember he taught me so much. But one of the things he said to me was that what makes him a good chief executive, he felt, was that he had built up personal wealth. And it's a similar thing from your side. But Magnus, even when you were a poor journalist working in Haight Street, as we both did at the old Persco 40 years ago, those days you also just said it like it was. Where does this come from? Where does your forthrightness emanate?
I don't know, Alec. Thanks for those kind words. To me, it's just natural. I mean, if you really believe in something and you've done your homework, you say what you think, and you don't let group pressure influence you. And maybe it came from the year or two that I spent in the army, where you learn to become tough and have an opinion, and journalism the same. And you and I know how much BS there was in the media world, and how the PRs will try and convince you to write a certain story. But if you dig a little bit deeper, I'll never forget the Magnum Group story that you broke as a young journalist. I mean, the Magnum Group was riding high, and the crest of everybody was just in awe of this group. And you came and you asked, and you delved a little bit deeper and found out this is actually a corrupt company. And that's the kind of thing. As a journalist, you dig a little bit deeper. You don't read the front page of a financial statement. You read the bottom page of the financial statements and what's hidden in the notes. The same in the investment world. Unfortunately, there's an element of, trying to sell you the next best product with no concern about the outcome. And maybe that's where it started. I don't know.
The pressures in the investment world in giving people advice must be multiplied, because it's your livelihood, it's your business, it's the salaries that you have to pay at the end of the month. And I guess keeping that backbone that you clearly had as a before you were a journalist, during your period as a journalist, and now has in the long term paid off, but you must have had some rough bumps.
Well, of course you do. I mean, you do have. I recall while I was still a journalist, we investigated many scams. I was threatened personally, and guys coming with guns looking for you. These pyramid schemes were very in the vogue in the late 90s, and we uncovered those at the start. But even established insurance companies would come with defective products. Bruce Cameron and I, for instance, we found a lot of funny stuff going on with insurance companies trying to sell mortgage-backed insurance products that you don't pay off your house bond, but you pay it into a 20-year endowment. And the costs were just so horrendous and hidden away that you will never pay off your bond in 20 years if you know where to look and you do the actuarial numbers. And the next minute, you're standing in front of a battery of lawyers and PRs having a go at you. That's exactly what happened. We were called to a meeting after we started writing these articles. We thought we were going for a cup of tea at Liberty Life's head office, and we walked into. There was about 20 people sitting there waiting for us to take us down. And then, they threatened us with all kinds of stuff. And that's just an example. There are many other examples. The Shemax was a classic example. We were on radio debating with the Shemax people. We were threatened with lawyers' letters. And I was threatened with a bribe of 500,000 Rand by the Shemax people. They actually invited me for coffee, and there was a bag under the table. And the guy looked me in the eye and he said, "Listen, there's some cash for you. Let's call it a quits and stop writing about us." And I got up and walked out. I mean, that's the kind of stuff that that comes along in the investment business, because there's so much money to be made if you can sell a defective product. Like Pig Vest, the Georgia family was selling that Pig Vest property syndications. The same story. You just look at page 53, which tells you that this scheme will collapse one day. But the public doesn't read to page 53. They read the front page. And you have an advisor who's been paid a huge amount of money to sell you this product as quickly as they can. And yeah, sure, they make a lot of money, but these things all collapse. So, it's sometimes the long road is the best road over time.
So, what do you make, given that background and given that context, at the latest developments at ESKIM, where you have Andre De Ruyter, who clearly now has come out with all guns blazing and has said, this place is, I think his number that he told Annika Larsen on the interview this week, there's R1 billion a month that is being stolen from ESKIM. And the context is important here, because we've just had a national budget where we've been told as taxpayers that ESKIM has required 256 billion in bailouts, and it's going to need another 260 odd billion in bailouts from taxpayers, from you and I. So R500 million of our money, the taxes we pay every month. The lady in Guguletu who is paying her 15% on her Coca-Cola, and. So everybody in this country in some way is contributing to this absolute farce where we're now bailing out an organization which is deeply corrupted. The guy who says it gets himself immediately dismissed and is told that he's a right-wing naysayer. That's the way they described him. I mean, I love to get your thoughts on this, and then to see if there were a legitimate government, not a legitimate, that's the wrong word, but if there were a responsible government running South Africa, how they should have handled it.
Well, I think the mask of the ANC has just come off. You've seen the ANC at its worst, in the sense that De Ruyter, better than everybody else, because he's the top guy, he knows where the money flown. He's reported it. He's to the police. He's reported to the politicians. He knows where the bodies are buried, and the ANC immediately turns vicious, fires him, starts calling him all kinds of names, like Natasha did a while ago, saying that De Ruyter is trying to overthrow the country. This is the ANC at its worst: greedy, growling, arrogant, totally out of touch, and they actually don't care because they're stealing so much money. And one wonders what the overseas investors are going to think about this. This is now being exposed. Bloomberg, Financial Times, and that's one of the reasons why, and I'm mentioning this at the Berg conference, that in the last 7 years, 6 years, R1 trillion has been withdrawn from the JSE via the stock market and the bond market. It is a humongous amount of money that is flowing out of the country. That's how the foreign investors are looking at South Africa, and they are running for the hills. We've seen it in the bond market this week. Incredible amount of foreigners selling. They're just getting out of town. They don't like what they're seeing. They see the corruption. It's being exposed, and you have our president, standing on a global platforms and make deep promises that we combating corruption, fight against corruption, which is a blatant lie, because this is how the ANC rolls, as they would say.
Okay, so a responsible government, let's just say the Rainbow Coalition were to be elected in 2024, how would a responsible government react to the De Ruyter disclosures?
Immediately appoint 2 or 3 judges with senior prosecutors, form some kind of a committee, and immediately start investigating. If De Ruyter does know who the cabinet minister is, let him reveal it in camera. Let them start doing lifestyle audits on the people that is named, but start doing something, not fire the guy and boot him, and to such an extent that he has to flee the country. That's the news that went out to the world, that De Ruyter had to flee the country because he spoke the truth in his view. So, I mean, that's what a government would do. And they won't do it. They have done nothing about the Zondo Commission. Nobody gets, it's just a question of, you have the untouchables in the ANC, and we know that there's significant amounts of money. The corruption is so entrenched, and it started 15 or 20 years ago with the touchy deal where the ANC owned 25%. That's where it already started. So effectively, the amount of money that the ANC is stealing via the ESKIM contracts and tenders is what keeps the ANC going.
Yeah, I had a fascinating interview earlier this week in Cape Town with Professor Jonathan Jansen. It's being processed at the moment and it will be out next week. But he tracks it back to even before then, when there was that very famous statement that I did not join the struggle to be poor.
That's
i.e., if you're a public servant, that means it's an open sesame to plunder the state resources. But given all of that, and it's now clearer than it ever has been, the state of this country, have we seen any reaction to the currency, or indeed your clients when they see this? Do they say, no, Magnus, I'm so despondent now, just take my money anywhere out of South Africa? Or is there any hope that things could turn around?
Amongst my clients, and I can only speak for what I experience and what I pick up from our various offices in the country, is that the pessimism and negativity is at an all-time high. I'm even finding that extremely wealthy people in the Western Cape, which is insulated from many issues in the country, they are now saying, I need to buy a property in Mauritius and set up structures because we don't know how long this is going to last. Even the Western Cape is starting to. So, many of our clients have a long time ago, fortunately, listened to us and externalized some of their assets, if not all of it. And they thank you for it because their money is in a safe environment where there's corporate governance and where there's law and order. I remember many years ago, the late Dr. Simon Murray being very emphatic about the fact that law and order is number one when they look for a country or a company to invest in. If you don't pass that barrier, they move on. And That's why we're seeing this outflow of capital. And I saw a very interesting chart which correlates the rand to the commodity cycle. And you and I know when the commodities are strong, the rand is strong. Now the commodities have been strong for 2 years, yet the rand has dropped from 13 odd rand to 18.50, which is the first time that has happened. And I ascribe it to the vast amounts of money that is being taken out of the country. Now that worries me. If the commodity cycles continues to decline, the depreciation in the currency is going to accelerate, especially with the grey listing becoming an issue, which I think most commentators are underestimating. They're all saying, it's not too bad, or it's in the market, it's in the price. I have a sneaky suspicion, and I'm basing this on an IMF report that I've read and written about on your website, where they're saying that it is significant. And so I think the players are trying to calm the markets down. I'm just saying that there's another school of thought that says the grey listing can be very bad for South Africa.
Well, on the grey listing, that was referred to in quite a lot of detail in the budget documents and in the press conference ahead of the budget. And the feeling I got from that, Magnus, and there's nothing more than a feeling, was that the grey listing is going to happen on Friday night when the announcement comes out, but that there's confidence within Treasury because they have addressed 15 of the 20 issues. There's confidence within Treasury that they will be able to reverse this in June. So that's the move is now, the mood is almost turned away from, well, let's stop the grey listing to, okay, let's just keep it as short as possible. If that were to be the case, would we then have a fall out of bed on Friday or over the weekend coming next week? And then in June, if there's a reversal by FATF, I think is the way you say it, then a strengthening of the rand. These are important issues, and I guess most people are looking at this and not really able to understand why it might move in either direction.
Well, I think the rand is already showing the weakness. If you look at the rand, it was at 17 rand 3 weeks ago, and today is blowing out again. It's close to 18.40. So that's a very big move. It's almost 8%. During a time where the dollar was quite weak. So the rand is now an outlier. It's now weakening substantially. So I think the smart money has already preempted the grey listing. Can it overshoot? Of course it can overshoot. To what levels? Now, I see some media outlets this morning spoke about 19, 1950. But we don't know. We're in uncharted territory. It can go to 20. It depends if we are back on the whitelist again soon, like Mauritius did in 18 months. That will be very positive for the country. If we do not get off that grey list and we stay on that grey list, and especially if you look at the company that we're going to be keeping, we're talking about Somalia and Ethiopia and Venezuela, and that's just a terrible, terrible. It's as a South African, I have to say it's going to hurt us very, very badly, and we're not making it easy for the international investment community to like us. Our positioning versus Russia and having military gains with Russia, which is the polecat of the world at the moment. Meanwhile, some American Congress people, leaders, have been questioning South Africa's access to the AGOA preferential tariff system. They're asking in the Senate, why should we give preferential access to South African goods, which benefits South Africa greatly, while they are, playing military games with Russia and China? That doesn't make sense. I mean, that's not how you win friends and influence people.
Yeah, it's quite the opposite. And AGOA would have a massive impact on South African agricultural sector in particular, and the people who are then employed by the farmers. So it looks like a mess. It is a mess. We're in a hole. Can you give me just one little glimmer of hope?
Well, that The Western Cape, I've been spending some time in the Western Cape, like yourself. I mean, it's like in another country. It shows you what a country can look like if it's well governed, with a high degree of honesty, with elected officials. I was in Cape Town yesterday. There were like 20 cranes, like the old Joburg. The skyline was filled with building cranes. It's a different country. I was sitting in our offices in the waterfront, looking at the sea, perfect day, and just saying, why can't the whole of South Africa be like this? And the answer is quite simply, the rest of the country, the ANC have deployed all their cadres, and they are really just consuming. They're just eating. They are, as you said earlier, they are eating in a way. They're just destroying the infrastructure. They're destroying the towns, which is so sad.
Yeah, the comment that Andre De Ruyter made in that interview was that he was told by someone senior that just let them eat a little, i.e., let them have a little bit of corruption. But if you consider where a little bit of corruption ends or leads to, then it really is a crazy way of looking at life. But we do have an election in 2024. Are you hopeful that something could happen there?
I think it's going to be a very interesting election. Are you going to have tectonic shifts in the plates, in the political alignment? And, right now everybody's speculating how much support the ANC will get. Is it 50? Is it 40? Is it 35? What will the coalitions look like? Which coalitions are acceptable or not acceptable? It's going to be very messy, but very exciting and scary as to how it's going to unfold. I mean, I noticed this morning Dr. Franz Cronier wrote a fairly upbeat article about South Africa, saying the outlook is the best it's been in 5 years. Now, I don't necessarily agree with that, but it's nice to have some positivity. He's saying the political system is working. Slowly, they're working out the ANC, and that there will be coalition politics, but other people disagree. They're saying, well, coalition politics can be extremely damaging and frustrating and horse training all the time. So yeah, it's a scary time to be a South African, and a scary time to be a South African investor, because we've gone through 5, even 10 years of very, very poor growth in South African assets, property in particular, residential, commercial. I did some work this morning on pension fund returns in South Africa. And there again, most pension funds have struggled to keep pace with inflation. So on a 10-year basis, you've not really made any money. The stock market has, despite the rally of the last 2 years, the returns over 10 years is about 9% on average. And you compare that with the S&P 500 at 20. So the overseas markets have given you double the return of the local market. And whether you do it over 5 years or 7 or 10 or 15, offshore unfortunately has been the safest place to be and the best returns. And that's all what I'm concerned about for my clients, because the point I make, and I'm going to make it at your conference, the only person who pays me is my client, nobody else. No institution, no fund manager, no insurance company pays me a cent. My client pays me. And, you can only return that by being as honest as you can.
Magnus Heystek is the founder and chief investment strategist at Brenthurst Wealth. He is also a keynote speaker at the BizNews conference next week. We have an array of stars there. Interestingly enough, in the Morningstar Awards for the best equity fund in South Africa, 2 of those who are presenting at the conference are are amongst the 3 finalists, and in the best international global fund in the Morningstar Awards, Sean Pesh, who's the other investment analyst who's presenting, is one of the 3 finalists. So we certainly are heading for a very interesting conference next week. There are a few tickets left, a few last-minute cancellations, and Magnus Heystek, as always, will be telling us exactly as he sees it, not as other people want him to see it. I'm Alec Hogg from BizNews.com.
This Budget Speech 2023 special edition of the BizNews Power Hour was illuminated by BrightRock. the first ever needs-matched life insurance that changes as your life changes.